our YouTube channel. We are now live on YouTube channel. Let me start by apologizing to all our viewers out there and to our guest. It's been one of those afternoons or mornings. Where everything just went wrong. Everything just went wrong, and I don't know what happened. I had set up, my computer blew up. I had to lose another laptop, and it's taking time. We had problems with connectivity. Oh, I'm so sorry, guys. This never happened before, and I'm hoping that it's a lesson for the future. But I'm so happy that we have our guest here, Ricardo, an old friend of mine. Man, what a great pleasure to have you, Ricardo. And I'm sorry about all these mishaps. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm good, Patrick. It's so nice to be here today. And look, these things happen, so we just roll with the punches.
Yeah. we have no choice, do we? And so we'll see how we can carry on. I can see that there are people that are beginning to join. Some other people are sending me messages to check what's the problem. I think for those of you who cannot make it today, who are maybe listening or we're hoping to listen in today or are not able to make it, this program is always here on this YouTube channel, which is Moments of Insight and Growth. And for those who forget that, you can also check on Kulati Coaching and Consulting. And so you can always bring your friends here, subscribe, and like this page because we want it to grow. So, and I'd like to welcome you all here because this is a podcast that helps you see things differently. It's a platform to inspire, to inform, to educate, motivate, and ultimately transform our thinking so that we can really become better families, better people in whatever endeavor of life we are focusing upon. And so we're driven by the idea that with God on our side, with hard work, with putting effort in whatever we're doing, with support, there's nothing that's impossible for us. So what we do on this platform, we profile people and individuals, and organizations that we believe have something to add to our society. People that are experts in their various areas of endeavor. And we bring them here so that they can begin to engage with all of us and we can understand a bit more what they are all about. And so today I have Ricardo, I'm sure the American says Weingart, Weingart, and he's known as an NPO lawyer. As I said, he's a man that I've known for many, many years. He helped me in my other previous leadership responsibilities and change management processes that were sensitive and complex. And I have a tremendous amount of respect and trust in Ricardo and his capacity, in his calm demeanor, but capacity to really get things done. And so Ricardo is a lawyer, a founder of Ricardo Weingart attorneys. He has an LLM degree from University of Illinois College of Law in the USA. He has a legal degree from University of Western Cape. And as far as I know, Ricardo, you've been focusing for the longest time on the non-profit sector, since 1999, such a long time. And you started off in this professional journey when you were working for the Legal Resources Center and the Legal Support Project, and you provided legal advice and assistance to NPOs and facilitated many trainings and workshops. I know I'm a beneficiary of that. And you have been on your own now or with your partners. I don't know, you're going to tell us a bit more about your company just now. And let me just, before we start, let me just give a disclaimer to those people who may be watching us. This is not intended to give a specified or specific legal advice that are specific to your situation, but this is intended for more informational and educational purposes. And if you are out there looking for a professional advice or professional input, feel free to contact Ricardo and maybe other people that may be professionals in this sector. So again, welcome to you, Ricardo. It's good to have you here, man.
Thank you, Patrick. It's so nice to be here. I think it's an honor, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, man. I'm so privileged as well to have you here. Now, please tell us about yourself. I've given a brief background about yourself. Just tell us about yourself, where you grew up, where you went to school, and what attracted you to law, particularly what attracted you to this area, this niche of NPO or NGO sector.
Yes, Patrick, I grew up in the Western Cape in a village or town called Grabouw. It's well known for, the fruit industry, in particular apples.
Yes.
And I went to school basically where I stayed at a primary school called Catherine Marie, and also the secondary school Groenberg, which is basically walking distance from where I stay. And then I studied at University of the Western Cape, which we sort of traveled about 2 hours a day, to the university, and another 2 hours using the bus and trains. And it's in essence where I grew up. And I must say that pursuing tertiary education at that stage it was quite a challenge, but also a privilege. A lot of support from family and my parents, and I must just pay tribute to them. They've been with me right from day one. In fact, the first day I went to the university, my parents, they went with me. The last day I was at the university, they were with me again. And they also said they're going to join us today. So yeah, it's quite a privilege. I was motivated basically to work for the non-profit sector. In particular, I started working at Lawyers for Human Rights. They actually embarked on a project in the rural area of the Overberg in the Western Cape, and so I got quite excited working with the advice officers. I worked for about 2 years with the Legal Resources Center, focusing on the issues of evictions on farms. But then I saw this vacancy at the Legal Resources Center, and that's why I applied. Because I wanted to work at the Legal Resources Center. They were doing dynamic work. But this project that they advertised, I didn't know much about the kind of work, but I thought if I could get in, I can do other work at a later stage. Yes. So I applied, and it's the title that you refer to, the project coordinator for the NPO legal project. So I applied. They asked me questions. The one lady asked me a question. She said, "Tell us about NPO legal entities." And I didn't prepare that well, Patrick. So I just said Section 21 companies. That was the buzzword at the time. And she said, "Tell us more." And I couldn't, but somehow I got the job. And they were quite concerned that I wanted to do other work, and I'm not interested in this NPO stuff. But actually, when I started out working with NPOs, I actually started to like this kind of work, and I realized the one thing I realized at the time, that there were not many lawyers in this field. There were a few lawyers focusing on NPOs, and they really guided me a lot, during that time. And somehow I just stayed, in this with this focus area.
Wow. I remember I was working for a Surplus People project, which was working to prevent the illegal eviction of farm workers. And we worked with the with the Legal Resources Center. There was a guy called Kobus. I can't remember his surname. He was a lawyer there. Yeah.
Yes.
Cobus Pinar. Yes,
Yeah.
sadly he died. Sadly he died. So I remember those days. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes. I must say he was one of the lawyers that really guided me in this process. And I remember Corbus in particular. I mean, all the other lawyers, they contributed, to my development. But Corbus, he asked one of the difficult questions, Patrick, during that time, because, we assisted a lot of organizations in terms of their
yeah.
legal stuff. And
Mm,
Corbus actually, at some point, he asked me, but look, I mean, you can set up an organization, you can help with the constitution, the tax stuff, and all of that. But what about the
mm,
governance?
mm.
And I must be honest, I didn't like the question at the time, Patrick. It was a difficult question. I didn't know how to answer it. But years ago, I think the answer I came across the answer, and it was actually in a discussion that took place between the Almighty and Solomon. And
Okay.
Solomon was given this proposition. Solomon was told, "Ask of me anything, and I'll give it to you."
Wow.
Now Solomon responded by saying, "Give me wisdom to govern
Mm,
and to lead your people, for who is able
wow.
to lead this great people of yours?" And
Mm,
that's really, I mean, he was talking about people, leadership,
mm,
governance, and
mm,
wisdom. That, in
mm,
my view, is basically the focus for governance, whether it's non-profit, for-profit, state-owned enterprises. And,
mm.
and, and I believe that's the answer to that difficult question that Corbus asked me, at the
Wow.
time. And it's about governance. so,
Wow.
so
What a source to get your answers from, man. That's powerful, eh?
yes,
Yeah. Now, I'd like to just transition a little bit because you've been in the NPO sector for all these years. And I mean, I've met people who think that the NPO sector is really for people that have failed in everything else that they wanted to do. They wanted to be in the corporate sector, they wanted to be an academic, but they couldn't get a job. So where else must I go? And they found it. So people look at the NPO sector as this dumping place for people that do not have a clarity of what they want to do. Can you just elaborate just your views on that, about the role as a career platform, the NPO sector as a career choice for people that want to go in that direction?
so Patrick, look, I must confess, I'm not familiar with that perception, and perhaps it's
Mm,
because I've been so closely working with the non-profit sector, and the people involved in the non-profit sector. And I've met the most
yes.
amazing and brilliant people in the sector, including yourself. I mean, like you said, we've gone back many years ago. Um,
Thank you.
and the non-profit sector is really very diverse in nature. I
Mm,
mean, there's a diverse of activities, advocacy, service-related activities, research,
mm,
litigation, a wide variety of activities undertaken by organizations. And,
mm,
my view is that a democracy is not possible without a vibrant civil society and a
yeah.
non-profit sector. And that is evident in the South African context. And, I think a lot of leaders have moved on from the non-profit sector to private sector and also to government.
Mm,
And I would say, as opposed to it being a dumping ground, it's actually fertile ground for
mm,
leadership and the development
mm,
of passionate, people, whether it's they move on to government or even
mm,
to the private sector, even if they stay in the non-profit sector.
mm.
I, I mean, they've made quite an
Yeah.
indelible impression on me, and
Mm.
I've never seen the or interpreted the in NPO sector as a dumping ground. I mean, that might be a perception by some people, um,
Yeah. There
but
are people,
even if
unfortunately, who have that mindset.
yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
so
Mm.
even if we look at the National Development Plan, it talks about non-profit organizations as partners in our development,
Mm.
and
Mm. Mm.
the non-profit sector and the people within the non-profit sector. I mean, I think they're brilliant people. For the most part, I mean, there are exceptions to the rule, of course, as in any industry.
Yes.
But for the
Yes.
most part, I mean, they're very impressive. And the
Thank you.
commitment, sometimes, even in the context where, and this is what I've seen, in my brief experience, or limited experience. I've seen sometimes people are so committed that
Yeah.
even when their funding runs low, they
Yeah.
committed, they stay the course. One of the most, impressive statements I've seen was many years ago when we were doing a workshop and there was a donor organization present at the workshop. And somebody said something controversial about the funding, and this one elderly lady got up and she said, "Look, whether we get funding or not, we're
Wow.
gonna do this." For me, that was it.
Yeah.
It was such a powerful statement, and I thought, wow. I mean, it's for some people, it's embedded in them. It's part of their circuitry, and they committed to the
That
sector.
DNA. It's a powerful
Yes.
testimony. It's a powerful testimony to the work that I mean. I do a bit of coaching. I have a full-time job, but I do some coaching. And I remember coaching a corporate person, and he said to me, "Listen, man," was a lady. You're so why are you wasting your time in the NPO sector? Why don't you come and join the corporate? I said, it's a choice that I've made. It's a career choice. I want to do this. And I tried the private sector. It was not my space. So now let's just move on to your work. You established your company. Just tell us briefly why you established your company and what services do you provide and who are your clientele? Who are the people that you work with?
Yes. I mean, the firm's name is Ricardo Weintraub Attorneys, and the the website is nonprofitlawyer.co.za. I sort of go by the phrase the NPO lawyer,
Yeah.
and so that was started in June 2009. With the exclusive focus on non-profit organizations, and it's twofold. The one is in terms of compliance, and then also governance. And
Okay.
After I've worked at the Legal Resources Center, I actually thought there's clearly a need for this kind of work. But it was a bit of a challenge for me to just move out, to establish a private firm focusing on this. But because the question is it sustainable?
That's always
And
a question mark.
yes. I, uh, I I was privileged to continue my studies abroad, in this field, and then I worked, also at an organization called the Nonprofit Consortium, and then
Yeah.
shortly after that, that organization closed down, and I worked at Inyatelo for about a year. But I also realized that, look, what we sometimes perceive as sustainable in terms of an organization is not always sustainable. So there's a bit of risk involved also in terms of setting up a practice, and
Yeah.
that's when I started, in 2009. And I must say I've learned quite a lot in this period. Part of what I'm doing is assisting organizations in terms of the setting up procedure.
Yeah.
And also in terms of advising them on their contracts, governance policies and systems, workshops, and I've also provided some educational materials for non-profit
Yes.
organizations. So it's largely focused on that. In that space, I must say, Patrick,
Yeah.
is that you deal with such a wide variety of non-profit organizations, and after I've worked in this field for over 20 years, one thing I
Yeah.
realized is that I don't know it all. There's, organizations working in other fields, maybe professional interest organizations, those working with environmental affairs, sports bodies, religious institutions,
Mm.
I was at one evening we were at a meeting, and it's uh, an organization that is focused on these associations that combat like wildfires. And as we were
Yeah.
sitting in the meeting, there was a call coming out. There's a fire in the area, and 1, 2, 3, the room was almost empty. It's a different, a very different dynamic, you know. So, so I feel so blessed that I've had this exposure to so many
Yeah.
organizations, and they're all unique. You know,
Mm. Yeah.
they do different interventions, and it's an opportunity for me also to learn, from organizations. So
Mm.
from that perspective,
Yeah.
it's been great to engage with those organizations. Sometimes I do stuff at a generic level,
Yeah.
for different organizations, but I'm
Mm.
really tested when I work with individual organizations, in
Yeah.
trying to understand, how they operate and what would
Yeah.
be the most appropriate advice for that organization.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
you can come up, and this is what I see often. You can come up with a particular method or recommendation, but it might
Mm.
not be suitable in a particular
Yes.
context.
Yes, yes, yes. I think that's a powerful point to make here, Ricardo, because I think each organization has unique features, has unique structure, legal and structures, and so on. So, and we're going to delve a bit deeper on that. Can I do something here? I see that on my it doesn't look great on my side, so I'm gonna put the video off, but I'll be here, and then I just want to clean this a little bit because I
Sure.
don't think some people can see. But for those of you who have got specific questions there at home, please feel free to ask those questions. You can submit them here online on the comment section. And but I do want at the same time now to as I clean my video to just ask you, Ricardo, to maybe answer this question. If you can just give us the basic definitions of the different organizations. We hear NPOs, we hear NGOs, we hear CPOs, we hear voluntary associations. Can you just briefly, what are the differences and why do they matter?
Yeah. So Patrick, in a nutshell, legally, there are basically three kinds of legal entities. The first one is the volunteer association, and that is the one that is most common in the South African context. Most organizations are set up as volunteer associations. The generic term for often for volunteer associations would be community-based organizations, because they usually focus on issues affecting communities, and they consist of members from the community. But that's the generic term. The legal term for the legal entity is a volunteer association, and you can get large organizations. In fact, political parties are set up as voluntary associations. It's set up in terms of common law. You've got a constitution. The constitution sets out, how the organization operates, what it's about, and that's one entity. My understanding is that there are about 90% of the South African entities are voluntary associations. The
Okay.
second kind of legal entity is a trust, which is now a bit more formal, because you cannot set up a trust unless it is registered in terms of the Trust Property Control Act,
Mm.
and it operates with a trust deed. And the board is usually, it's referred to the Board of Trustees. It's
Mm.
a bit more complicated, or regulated, because there's a Trust Property
Yeah.
Control Act as well. But it's a form of legal entity. And then the third one is the non-profit company, which is incorporated in terms of the Companies Act. And it has a board of directors, and some may have members, some may not have members. And
Mm-hmm.
it's basically governed. So those are the three
Okay.
legal entities. Now, any of those can register in terms of the Non-Profit Organizations Act, which is a voluntary registration facility. Now, that act has got two important definitions. The one is a non-profit organization, which basically refers to those three that I just spoke about. And
Yeah.
then it talks about a registered non-profit organization, which is an organization registered in terms of the NPO Act. Those organizations, the three, can also apply for tax exemption, which is, for the most part, a public benefit organization. So you could have, for example, one organization having three numbers. So let's say if it's a company, it would have a number issued by the CIPC, the Companies Commission, which is the company registration number, and then it could also have a number issued by the NPO Directorate, which is the NPO registration number, and then it could also have a PBO number, and in some instances it may also have other, numbers that are related to other registration facilities. But it's those three. And the interesting thing is, Patrick, is that look, this was one of the lessons that I learned when I started, and for me it was a bit confusing, when I started out.
I can imagine.
Yes. So, and I find it often still, and it's even some of the bigger organizations, they still grappling with these, the distinction between these entities. But it's part of the process. And I think the other references to like CBOs, CSOs, NGOs, NPOs, it's referred to like a subset of kinds of organizations, but there's not necessarily a legal connotation to those descriptions.
Okay. No, great. I think at least now we know that there are different kinds of legislations that that we're going to come back to the PBO thing just now, because if I understand correctly, is it a tax SARS related piece? Is that right? Yeah, we're going to come back to that. Now, here's a person, let's say, who's working for a corporate company or a government department, or a person who's working in the community who wants to establish an effective NGO and a compliant NGO. What must they do? Where should they start? Where should they go? What must they have?
Yes. So Patrick, in my view, there's there's the legal side, and that's where I normally get involved when somebody sets up an organization. I would send them some information that explains the different legal entities, the principles, and all of that. Now that part is important, but in my view, it's not as important as finding the right people that can walk the path with you in terms of operating that organization and taking on the responsibilities. I think that is, for me, fundamentally the most important task, is finding the right people. Yes. And sometimes there's a tendency to choose from among the friends, and that is not always the best option. I mean, I can understand if somebody starts an organization that's the sort of the default position, but it's not always necessarily the best option, because you need to find people who are willing and able to walk the path with you, and not somebody that's just willing to say, for the sake of maintaining the friendship, okay, it's fine, I'll stay with you because I'll start the organization with you, because that in itself is a bit of a signal, because you need somebody that can help you to hold you accountable, in terms of running an organization. The issue here is a key issue, is that when you set up a non-profit organization, let's say you haven't set up, or you're not part of a non-profit organization previously, if you set up an organization, you effectively moving from your private space to a public space.
Okay.
Just to give one example, you register in terms of the NPO Act, your details are now accessible to the public. You can't claim, privacy. You can't rely on the provision of the Protection of Personal Information Act, because you've now moved to that public space. Yes. And for me, that's a signal, a broader signal that, look, you're not operating now in your private space anymore.
Mm.
Similar, you may have had that kind of relationship, a private relationship with your friends, but now you're moving to a public space where there's public accountability demanded, especially if you're getting funds, from external donors. So from that
Yeah.
perspective, it's quite a significant decision, and that
Mm.
recruitment also relates to the issue of governance, because
Mm.
and coming back to the question that Kobus asked me years ago,
Yeah.
you might have the constitution, the NPO number, the company number, CIPC number, all of that, but that doesn't mean that the organization is going to be governed effectively. You
Yes.
need to have systems of governance in place.
Mm.
So the people are important, and then moving from that, the legal side is very important, but also a commitment to governance and to ensure that you introduce appropriate governance systems for the organization. So
Mm.
if I can share a brief example, Patrick.
Sure, go ahead.
Um, I've engaged with different kinds of organizations. One of the organizations that or kinds of organizations that I've engaged would be those dealing with um, the ECD,
The early childhood
precious
development.
early childhood development, yes. And I
Yeah.
would used to say, look, it's important that you need to have risk management in place.
Yeah.
And I was criticized for that by some way. They're saying, no, this is a community-based organization. You're coming here with your terminology, governance terminology. It's not suitable in this context. Um, now, look, I'm using the terminology, but when I do engage, I explain what it's about.
Yes. Yes.
In most cases, people were appreciative of that, because now they're saying, okay, so this is what it means. And I say, look, it's not complicated. You can have a basic risk management system in place. But
Mm.
why it's so important is because you're dealing with children,
Mm.
and people,
Mm.
they hand over their children in your responsibility. And if you're not willing to just have a basic risk management system in place, then in my view, that in itself is a core risk. Because I mean, it's not so complicated to apply and understand risk management. I'm
Yeah.
not advocating for a complicated system, but
Yeah.
you need to have some system in place to make sure that you protect the interest of children,
Mm.
and you safeguard them, and
Mm.
I mean, that's recognized in our legislation, in our judicial system. There was a case last year that came out of the Constitutional Court exactly
Mm.
after a child got hurt at an
Mm.
ECD center. Now, look, I'm
Yes.
not criticizing the ECD center, but there
Mm.
was a principle that came out at the Supreme Court of Appeal where the court
Yeah.
said you cannot expect government in this context to take on that responsibility to ensure
Mm.
that there's a safe environment for the children to play. It's those
Mm.
involved at the organization that must do so. So that's
Yeah.
a principle.
Mm.
Obviously, it's subject to the available resources,
Yeah.
because they cannot be expected to have a sprinkler system, you know, uh, at the facility, but
Yeah.
they can get a fire extinguisher, as an
Mm.
example, um,
Mm.
and just have some of the basic systems
Just
in
the
place.
basic stuff.
Yes.
Now, Ricardo, this is very important that you are mentioning now, because I mean, I mean, over the last year, over the last 2.5 years, I've been doing this thing. I may have received, let's say, about 8 phone calls, and I spoke to some of the people, activists in the community, who is looking at the people, at the children, that are not taken care of. Maybe they have some sort of a disability or physical challenge, or whatever the case may be. They pool their resources together. They provide housing for these people in their home during the day, and they look after them, and they give them food. They collect from church or from friends, and they give them. Another one was in the rural area, where they felt that the children did not have a proper meal, or whatever the case may be. So let's come together as women, and let's plant and give children this. Those people have a activist interest in helping the community. what can be done to educate them about these broader issues? And secondly, how do you make it less cumbersome and less expensive for them to do that risk management, but without stopping their activism?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question, Patrick. Look, I think one of the ways is actually what you alluded to in the question is about pooling of resources. There are some organizations that are, umbrella organizations that are geared towards assisting organizations, in terms of assisting them with, having systems in place and providing advice. One example, and I'm not sure if they're still involved to that extent, but, with the Legal Resources Center, we've assisted a lot of organizations in terms of providing legal advice. But there are other organizations out there. So look, let's say an organization starts out, basically that organization doesn't have to start from scratch, because a lot of organizations have already, they've done this for a couple of years, and they're not unwilling to share some of their insights, their resources, and some of their documentation with other organizations starting out. And so from that perspective, I think it's important to establish, where are the resources in, related resources in the field.
Yes.
About two weeks ago, I was part of I was asked to facilitate a workshop on a Saturday, by a former employer, in fact, in Yatelo. So we facilitated the workshop. A lot of organizations were involved, and I was just saying to them, look, they now had this good relationship with Inatelo, and by virtue of that, Inatelo asked me to participate in the workshop, and that is leverage, that's there. And I think that is, it's important from that perspective for organizations to look at what are the resources at their disposal, and to make use of those resources. There are other examples where, there was an organization or group of organizations in the Eastern Cape. When COVID started, they had an issue with, the department, and in fact, the Department of Social Development. The matter ended up in court. Now, usually a non-profit hasn't got that kind of funds to go to court.
Yes.
But a law firm did it on a pro bono basis. They did it free of charge, and they were successful, in the matter. And that's basically because of relationships and pursuing the options that are available.
Thank you so much for that, because I think so many people are stuck there, and they want to know, what can we do? We don't have the money to develop these huge plans. Now, we're going to come back to the legal side a little bit just now, but I know that there is also this side of strategy. So in other words, by the time people get to you to say they want to register a company, you probably assume that they probably would have a founding document with the vision, mission, or do you help them with those things as well? So let's say, for example, someone is listening to us now. They say, man, I want to start. Do I start with working on the founding documents in terms of the vision, the mission, the goals of the organization? Or do I start with the registration? Let's say go onto some website and register. Tell us about that process of registration. What is required?
So Patrick, the vision would usually precede the legalities, and for me, it's usually beneficial when I assist an organization in terms of the setting up, when they've already conceptualized what they want to do. Sometimes I would assist with further research, but that's more for the application for their PBO approval. But they have already formulated, what they want to change in society, and that's really quite an important aspect of setting up an organization. Earlier we referred to getting the right people on board, but you can really only get the right people on board if you have a vision that they prepare to follow, and that they would buy into. That is, it's almost like, I would say, governance 101 is having a vision, but also to continuously nurture that vision. But that's something that, for the most part, I'm not really involved in that process, except for purposes of formulating the founding document, the constitution, or the MOI, that I would make suggestions, in terms of the wording, because it's of a legal nature. So from that perspective, I would provide input. But I found that when people have really given thought to the strategy and what they want to do, then my contribution in that regard is minimal. What I found that some people would ask me for just some insight would be based upon my perspectives of the sector and whether or not I think it's a feasible or sustainable concept. And again, I can give some views, but I like the way you started out with the disclaimer. So I would I would give my input subject to the disclaimers. Yeah, but Patrick, what I can say in this regard is that given that I've now been working with NPOs for about 20 years, for me it is so amazing to actually meet up with some organizations that have been in existence now for about 20 years. One example is the organization I referred to earlier, Inyatelo. I was actually at the Legal Resources Center at the time when I assisted with the formulation of the trust deed, and that organization has now been quite a prominent organization for many years. Yes. And so really when and a lot of organizations are not around anymore, that I've been involved in. But it is encouraging to see that there are organizations that have been they've been around for so many years and they're still going strong. And I think, in setting up a non-profit organization, the key question is really whether there is a need for the organization, and once it's established, whether it will be sustainable beyond just the legal side. And I must say, if you want to set up an organization effectively, unfortunately, in my view, it comes with cost implications. But the target group that I'm focusing on mostly, for them, they've already taken that into account. It's obviously it's different for community-based organizations. Because and I engage with community-based organizations often, sometimes on a pro bono basis, but often when, let's say, a corporate would say, "Can you please assist some of our beneficiaries in this regard?" But just because of for my sustainability as well, unfortunately,
and also time. I mean, it can be time consuming, so you need that time to be paid for. Now, I think you sort of you've clarified it, and I like the way that you took on this, because I'm thinking about a young lawyer out there who is listening to this and who might say, "Man, I never thought of the NPO as a real area where there's so much to do, where there's so much work to do, where someone can sustain themselves." And with this now, we just open their eyes up to say, not everyone to the government, to the NPA, whatever the case may be. There are so many of these options. And I think that's very, very important to mention. And then now, I just want us to move a bit more now to looking at these other issues. You do quite a bit of education you've got videos. In fact, you started this whole online education thing way before COVID. Congratulations, man. You are a trailblazer in that regard. In one of them, you on your website, you talk about 5 compliance issues for nonprofit. And I know that we may have touched on them now, but if you can just summarize them in some sort of a bullet point format so that people can all know what are the key 5 key compliance issues for nonprofits.
Patrick, can I maybe start with the context of that video, right? So
Yeah.
I was privileged to be part of the subcommittee of the Davis Tax Committee. Now, the Davis Tax Committee was looking at quite a couple of issues affecting tax, including, let's say, deceased estates, VAT, and part of what they had to look at also was PBOs and taxation. So, it's a complex field of law, taxation for public benefit organizations. I mean, that's where I essentially got involved in when I started with the LRC, is that they were looking at the tax law for PBOs. So I'm sitting there, and there were also representatives from the South African Tax Revenue Service present. Yeah. And one of the issues that they raised was about the issues of what was basically happening at that time. Some taxpayers, when it came to the end of the or tax season, one way in which some dubious taxpayers, not all taxpayers, but the dubious ones, where they tried to reduce the tax payable to SARS, they would say that include in their tax return that they've made donations to non-profit organizations, and they've never made the donations, right? But they wanted the deduction, and they would maybe fill in the details of either a fictitious organization or an actual organization in order for them to now basically defraud the system.
Yeah.
Now, non-profits didn't do anything wrong in that context, but the challenge now is SARS. They had to now cross-reference when somebody says they made a donation. They had to cross-reference that with the tax return of the non-profit organization to see if the organization actually got the donation. So, by implication, it required non-profit organizations to also submit their tax returns on time. So, basically, the broader context meant that non-profit organizations were now required to become compliant, because some were not compliant in that regard. And so from that, and so one of the questions came up, but how do we deal with this? And some were saying, but there should be increased awareness and education. And that for me prompted that particular video about the 5 compliance issues. One of the issues that I deal with is the issue of taxation, to ensure that your reports are submitted or the tax returns are submitted on time. But there's specific questions that are being asked, in the tax return, also like including the donations that you receive, your business activities. So that is really an important part of compliance, to ensure that in some organizations have at the time, and the impression was that if you're exempt, you're not required to submit tax returns. So I just wanted to make some contribution in that regard. So the one is that about tax. The other one is about employment. A lot of organizations, they employ personnel. They also make use of the services of volunteers. So, once that happens, if you employ people or volunteers, the employment-related legislation that must be complied with. And we have at least 6 different laws dealing with the employment relationship. So from that perspective, it's important. And then also, whether it's a company or a trust or a volunteer association, you must comply with your founding document and also the law governing the organization. As I mentioned, with those that are registered in terms of the NPO Act, those organizations must submit annual reports, narrative reports, and also financial reports. And my understanding is that more than 50% of the organizations registered in terms of the NPO directive are non-compliant. Now, that might be for different non-compliant, yes. That might be for different reasons. We don't really know. I think a lot of those organizations are dormant. But I do think the issue of compliance is actually an opportunity for the non-profit sector. Because if the level of compliance is so high, an organization participating in this and watching this afterwards, I would think it's an opportunity for the organization to ensure that you're compliant and that you're able to demonstrate that to your donors and to say, look, you don't have to be concerned about issues of compliance. In fact, we're acting beyond compliance, and you can refer them to policies that the organization has adopted. Another compliance issue which I just alluded to in that video is about the Protection of Personal Information Act, or the POPIA.
Yes, I don't want us to talk about that. Well, that's a big one.
Yes. So can I talk about, or do you want to ask? Go ahead.
So far you've mentioned the issue of the first one was the financial. Am I right? Yeah, and then there was the tax. It was a tax. What was the second one?
NPO Act.
NPO Act, and now you're talking about this one of the POPIA Act.
Yes. So the NPO Act and the employment legislation, and the POPIA one, it's like the whole idea is that if somebody processes personal information outside of your household activity, then the organization must have a lawful basis for doing that, and there must also be some procedures in place to ensure that you protect the information. So this act came in full effect in 2021 July, but it's been on the cards, I think, since 2014, but it was never in operation. It came into operation in 2020, but then effectively it gave us like a 12-year period to become compliant, right? So in theory, there should be compliance by now, but the reality is it's a bit different, right? And it's it's not only non-profits. A lot of entities, I believe, are still battling with this. But with non-profit,
it needs a bit of capacity. I know at SOS Children's Villages, where I now work, I mean, we had to set up a team to make sure that we get on top of this thing, but then educate the senior management team about it, make sure that it's done. So it requires quite an attention, and there's compliance issues. So you're right, it's an important element. Yeah.
So usually, and this is why I started out, when I did the first workshop in 2014. Interestingly, the first workshop was that week when Senzo Mayowa was killed.
Yes.
And I actually used because the Cape Times had a sketch of him as he was diving at the Gold Coast, and I actually used that in just to ask if it constitutes personal information in the first workshop I had. So at the time, I must say there was a bit of resistance on the part of the organizations that I've engaged with. But the point for me is that it's clear organizations process personal information, whether it's the board members, employees, volunteers, the beneficiaries, consultants, donors. Yeah, exactly. Now, I'm so glad you mentioned that, Patrick, because again, remember when I said about this, the context of compliance with, that I experienced at the Davis Tax Committee. The context now is also important. Some see this as a compliance burden, but there's important development happening now. There's the Financial Intelligence Center last year had a webinar where they spoke about the risks involved with non-profit organizations in terms of money laundering and terrorist financing. They
Sure.
make a couple of recommendations,
Yeah.
including if you get funding from a donor, you need to be clear that is legitimate funding and that the donor is able to provide that. So they make recommendations, not legally binding, but the point is that the Financial Action Task Force, which is an international body, basically said that non-profits are at risk, right, of being abused for purposes of money laundering and terrorist financing. So for the most part, I don't think most non-profit organizations are at risk, but there are some that are at risk, and some, I mean, there's some bogus organizations as well. That's a reality. And that context essentially creates the need for organizations to be more vigilant and also to demonstrate compliance with the protection of personal information, because there is that broader context in which we
Yeah.
operate.
Man,
And
let's just talk a little bit about that, because how can organizations do that, pick that up? For example, let's say there's a drug lord who lives close by, and then they decide, let's just dump 10,000 a month to the organization A, and at the end of the year, can you please give us a Section 18A certificate, whatever the case may be, or some sort of letter that says we're giving money to these people. But the organization that is a recipient of this money may not know about the business activities of this entity or this person. What processes must they follow? To what extent can they be held accountable? Because they need the money. Someone is giving them the money, and they may not have the capacity to check the bona fides of these business activities. So can you just comment about that?
yes. So Patrick, there's a principle in our law that ignorance is not an excuse, right? So even though, and that's the reality for all of us, right? It's not a principle applicable to non-profits. It's a principle applicable to all of us.
Everyone.
Um, so the Financial Intelligence Center, when they hosted this webinar, I mean, they gave some examples of organizations where money goes out of the country, money comes into the country, and they basically saying that organizations must have some due diligence in place in order to ensure that they know, the money that they receive, that it's legitimate funding. Also, if they use it or transfer the money to beneficiaries, that they know that it's legitimate, right? So there must be some process, and organizations, there's requirement in other laws. We've got POCA, I can't get to the full name, Prevention of Organized Crime Act, right? Where there are obligations on citizens, whether it's individuals, organizations, that you don't receive funds that are illicit, have been used or obtained through illicit means. And the fact that the organization doesn't know that is not an excuse, or it maybe it even doesn't know about the law. That's not an excuse, in terms of our legal system. According to the Financial Intelligence Center, the organization must now obtain further information once they get funding, to ensure that, I mean, they must just familiarize themselves that this is not illicit funding. It's got nothing to do with money laundering or terrorist financing. And so from that perspective, even it's recommended, let me put it this way, that the organization must document the control system that's in place. Now, that's some of the developments that are happening at this moment. What I see with some organizations is that it's almost as if those kind of developments are not really relevant, because a lot of organizations are focused on, and I say it with respect, but they focus on getting funding, right? And
the bread and butter issues.
And I'm saying as a practitioner in this field that um, I appreciate the importance of focusing on the issue, on fundraising, but we're living in a context now where just showcasing what you do as an organization is not enough in terms of your activities. You need to incorporate issues of governance. You need to take into account what is happening and how the regulatory environment will impact upon the organization. Because it's important to focus on stakeholder confidence, like we spoke about risk management earlier. That's now increasingly becoming a standard, in terms of donor funding. I was part of an engagement recently with the Department of Social Development, and one of the questions that what was asked was whether or not risk management should be part of the criteria for funding of organizations. So it's important for organizations now to take that into account, and that is so closely related to the Protection of Personal Information Act. So when we collect information, on the one side, the Financial Intelligence Center is saying collect the information.
Yeah.
But the POPIA is saying once you collect the information, make sure that you safeguard the information and that you process it in terms of the act. Now, can I just make just a general recommendation?
Yeah, sure.
Because it sounds a bit overwhelming, Patrick. That
It is.
I mean, this guy.
You as the people that work for the organization are busy trying to make sure that your beneficiaries or your target group is getting the services. You're going out there to look for funding. You're trying to make sure that you are kept above the water. And now there are these things as well on the side of legal compliance with all these acts. Some of them are so obscure, like, for example, this financial intelligence center group. They don't even share that information publicly, as far as I know. So but go ahead.
Yes, and I can almost hear some people are saying, Patrick, what's wrong with this guy that you invited today? He's just talking about compliance issues. But look, I think if we use POPIA as an example, that is going to be with us. It's applicable to all of us. I'm not exempted, in terms of its application. I'm a legal practitioner. I need to comply with POPIA. FICA as well. I mean, there's some requirements applicable to me as a legal practitioner. So, and I can't say that I'm too excited about all the compliance issues, but I also know there are opportunities embedded, in the process. So, one issue that we've spoken about previously, it's about how do you leverage, support or resources. One key opportunity, I think, is not a lot, all legal entities in South Africa are now grappling with POPIA compliance, right?
Yeah.
So whether it's a small organization or big organization, I would suggest, if you're a small organization, next time you engage with a potential donor or corporate, instead of asking them for money, ask them to assist you with your POPIA compliance.
Okay.
Because they've got the resources in any case, they can assist you. They can, and if we think about a potential relationship, a long-term relationship with a donor, I think it's good to start on that basis instead of asking money first. To look at other ways of just starting a relationship, and that gives that gives the donor also the sign that you are interested in governance and compliance. I mean, I don't think it's going to be difficult for them to say yes, because they've got the resources on board. They've done it, and to assist the organization with it, I think it would be monumental. And I think it's more likely that a potential donor would want to forge a relationship with that kind of an organization.
Yes.
Secondly, there's some free resources available on the internet, in terms of POPIA. I mean, personally, I've watched so many videos and webinars on POPIA. aimed at increasing my understanding. So there's a lot of resources. Not everything is free of charge. There are some resources that are available at a price. And yeah, so it's not that organizations are at a complete loss, in terms of complying with the legislation. And I just think it's a good opportunity. King Ford talks about risk management, but they basically talk about risk and opportunities. So I preach that, as part of the governance workshop, but I try to live it out too by also looking at what other opportunities.
Yes. Okay. I see that the time is at 11 minutes past, and I do want to just check with you whether you're still fine. If you can just wrap up with the last few questions that are left, is that
Sure.
okay with? Yeah. Now, to those people that are still with us, I want to thank you for joining, and just to say that we are using a different device today because I had to use my cell phone, so I may miss the comments if there are any that are coming through, because we're using a cell phone, and I am, we're battling to be able to operate this as the laptop would do. So if I miss your comment, please bear with me. But you can come back and watch this, or I think Ricardo gave his website, which is NPO lawyer. .org, am I right? .org.za.
Nonprofitlawyer.co.za. But if somebody just types in my name on Google, the website should
They'll
come
be
up.
able to find it. And then people that really want specific information about the POPIA Act, about all of these kinds of things that we have talked about so far in the area of compliance, because it's a big thing and many of us do not have the resources to be able to look into it. And I was just writing those things now that we need to put in terms of our own organization onto our own risk register now, having listened to you both. For me, this has been very, very useful, Ricardo, and I do want to appreciate you for that. Now, there's an area of fundraising, and I want to link it to the POPIA Act, where organizations send staff members to let's say, to the malls and places like that, and then they recruit them to become members. And those people, when they do that, they give in information about their banking details and all of that kind of stuff. So there is that one group. There is also religious organizations like mosques, churches, synagogues, where they collect information of people for their tithes or offerings and things of that nature. What are the requirements for those kinds of different activities by the religious bodies, but also by the NGOs that do that kind of fundraising? Are the same POPIA applicable to those setups as well?
So Patrick, there's the POPIA Act. It can be a bit complicated. What I'm trying to do is to explain it in a manner to organizations that's easily digestible. So at the core of POPIA, it's about. Oh, thank you. It's about what is personal information, what's processing, and they like those concepts have got a particular meaning. But once we're clear on the concepts, then there are what's called the conditions for processing, and it's 8 conditions. Difficult to summarize it basically, but that's the core of POPIA. It's about the 8 conditions, and if I can summarize it in a very simplistic manner, the first one is really about who is responsible, who and when that responsibility kicks in, right? And in this context, we're talking about non-profits. The non-profit entity is the responsible party. Secondly, it's about on what basis the organization would process personal information. In summary, there's two, but there's actually 6, but 2 are important. The one is either in terms of consent. The consent could also be, like, let's say, in the form of a contract. Now, the
Okay.
consent is defined. What is consent? You don't need to have a written consent, but it's always advisable, because if there's any dispute about the consent, then the responsible party must prove that there's consent.
Yeah.
Now, the second C, or the second aspect under the what is about the law. Basically, that's another reason why you process personal information. So let's say you
Mm.
employ somebody, then the law requires you to collect certain information,
Yeah.
right? So if it's not because of the law, then it's usually consent. The other grounds, but for the most part, it doesn't come up with non-profits. But
Yes.
I
Okay.
wouldn't exclude the relevance. So that's the second one, right? So it's the
Mm.
who, the what, and then the third one is about the why. Why do you process it? Now, the why
Mm.
is related to what the organization does, right? So let's say it's an ECD center. So by implication, it would also process information of children and of their parents.
Yeah.
And in that context, the consent requirement is, yeah, I mean, you must have the consent from the responsible part, not the
Mm.
competent person, which would be the parent or the guardian, for the most
Yeah.
part.
Mm.
The fourth one is about who else, right? So if you receive personal information, now just imagine the organization receives personal information, let's say for its beneficiaries, the children. In some instances, the organization may transfer that information to somebody else.
Yeah.
With nonprofits, often the donors may ask for additional information. So that is the reality. You're going to transfer the information further. In some
Mm.
instances, the auditors may ask for further information. If you appoint new board members, as an example, further
Mm.
information will be submitted to the NPO directorate if it is registered. Um,
Mm.
so in that context, there are two key issues to consider. The one is consent. So if
Mm.
there is consent, then that usually deals with the further transfer. So by
Yeah.
implication, let's say you collect information. If we use the ECD, you've got a website, and the idea is you want to put pictures of the children on the website. Then
Yeah.
you have to get the consent,
Mm.
from the parents to do so. Right
Mm.
at the start, when you get the consent, cater for that further processing. Right.
Yes.
So who else consent? And then if there's no consent, then the question is about compatibility. So there's a whole exercise to establish whether the further transfer of the information is compatible with what you do. Now,
Yeah.
you can avoid that if you have consent, but that's the four: the
Mm.
who, the what, why, who else. Now,
Mm.
the other four, I try to separate by looking at the other four in terms of a bowl. The first issue is about the quality of information, right? What is the information? Is it up to date? Is it accurate? Um, so that's important.
Mm.
That's the fifth requirement. The sixth requirement is about the information security. Is that
Yeah.
information protected in your hands?
Mm.
And then the next one, and it may not be in that particular order, but the next one
Yeah.
is the transparency. To what extent do you engage with the public to tell them, look, this is the information that we've got? Have you got your prior manual that explains this is the information that we've got, why we get the information, why we use it, so that people know? And then the last information, or the last requirement, is about how do you engage with the data subject, the person whose information you're processing. Um,
Yeah.
do they know that you've got the information? Have you informed them that we've got
Mm.
this information? How do they, if they want to engage with you, how do they contact you? So that kind of engagement. So
Mm.
in a nutshell, and that, like I said, it's very basic. It's the
Yeah.
eight conditions for processing. But
Mm.
there's another chapter in the Act that is
Yeah.
especially relevant to nonprofits, and that is direct marketing.
Yes.
So
Yes.
under that direct marketing, it basically, there's, in the definition section, it also says that direct marketing includes soliciting funding from any person. And
Mm.
so that basically means when you look at the act and it talks about direct marketing, it means fundraising.
Yeah.
So that, it brings NPO fundraising square into Popia. And
Yeah.
at this moment, consent is defined differently. There are two C's under that direct marketing: uh, customer and consent.
Mm-hmm.
Consent in direct marketing is different from consent in the eight, eight principles or conditions.
Yeah.
So from that
Mm.
perspective, look, it's not complicated in my view, but
Mm.
there must be awareness. And I'm doing a bit of a disservice to the organization by trying to explain this in a short time frame.
No,
Um,
no, no. The purpose really is for people is just to whet the appetite
yes,
for for
yes,
for, for people to then appreciate the seriousness of this issue and go and do their own investigation.
yes.
The issue is not that you'll be able to satisfactorily and fully address all the issues with the time that we have.
Yes, yes. So Patrick, I just wanted to and I'm just sneaking in a bit of marketing here. But we've
Yes.
recently, I've done with another practitioner, Peter Hendricks, who's also working in the space. We did a 2.5 hour um, mini course on fundraising where we look at the laws applicable to non-profit organizations within the fundraising context. Um,
Mm.
so look, it's really not the kind of a product that is out there at the moment. I mean, there are others focusing on fundraising, but we're dealing with the legal aspects of it, which I think
Mm.
is, it's very important. And if you
Okay.
had to consult a legal practitioner for 2.5 hours, um, yeah, compared to what the product, the price is for that product, there's really no comparison. So I would
Mm.
really encourage, and we're dealing with the issue of direct marketing and POPIA,
Mm.
and its relevance. So I would really encourage participants to consider that.
Okay, okay, great. I really appreciate that because I think now people can go away with something that they can do. They can reach out to you. They can say, I need this course. When is it happening? How much is it costing? And so that we can participate. As we conclude, at the beginning, you spoke about the importance of the people that you select that are going to go the journey with you if you are starting an organization and even if you have an already organization. What are the key characteristics that people must look for in recruiting and selecting board members?
Okay. So part of it, Patrick, it's about the characteristics of the particular person, but then also linked to that, that's in terms of what's required on the part of the organization. I would
Mm.
say when you look at a potential candidate to serve on the board, it's
Mm.
important to have somebody who's committed.
Mm.
As somebody in terms of the what the organization is about, and that
Yeah.
commitment might not necessarily be there at the beginning, but it's something that can be nurtured, over a
Yes.
period of time. Somebody that
Mm.
is a commitment to ethical values, because I
Mm.
mean that's the core focus of at least the first two principles of the King 4 report, and
Mm.
it's really it's a commitment to ethics because that's what the organization is about, and that
Mm.
person must also be committed to that. In
Mm.
addition to that, I would say it's somebody that has time available to dedicate to the organization. Sometimes we
Mm.
recruit people on the basis that we're just meeting 4 times a year, and that gives a not the correct indication in terms of what's required because the meetings are important, but what's required is actually beyond
The meeting.
the meeting time. Yeah. So it's somebody
Mm.
that can really was prepared to invest their time in terms of the organization, attending meetings, but also executing tasks outside of the meeting
Mm.
framework. And then
Mm.
the organization might be, if we look at the areas of governance, there might be a particular area that the organization may, um, you know, feel it would be beneficial to have somebody. So if we use Popia as an example. I mean, that's now a pertinent topic. So if you can have somebody on your board with that kind of exposure, then I think it would be beneficial. Doesn't necessarily mean that person will do the operational stuff, but I think it would be beneficial. The the other areas would include issues like legal compliance, financial management, governance, risk management, strategy or business development. You know, it may require the organization to look at in a particular field for a candidate. Now, this is what I quite like about King 4 because King 4 has got this recommendation that professional bodies should encourage their members to serve on boards. Now, I think it's a noble recommendation, and I think that's actually where organizations should, consider or start, this process to say, okay, if we need somebody in terms of a particular skill, let's see what professional bodies would be focusing on that, so that because I mean you can have somebody with the generic attributes and characteristics, but if somebody is not familiar with let's say risk management or legal compliance, the organization still has a deficit in that regard. And from that perspective, you want the board to be diverse, in terms of the different skills and qualities that you want the board to have. So yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I've got two questions for you, and then that's it. We're done within the next 3 minutes. The first one, just briefly, what are the personal liabilities for board members, and what can they do to mitigate that? And the other one is around I'll come back to it just now. If you can just deal with this one first. I wanted to ask another one, but I'll come back to it now.
Yes. So, I mean, the short answer to that is there are risks in terms of personal liability for board members. But I don't know of board members of non-profits that have been held liable in their personal capacity. However, that I wouldn't use that as a benchmark in terms of, because nobody wants to be the first one.
No.
But the thing is, the courts will always consider the issue of liability in the context of the knowledge and the knowledge and the exposure of that particular person, right? So, if somebody is not a legal practitioner, the court wouldn't look at that person with a legal, the exposure or experience of a legal practitioner. But in the same breath, the organization court will also consider what systems the organization has put into place. So, like I said, the issue of risk management. Now, if an organization hasn't got a risk management system in place, I think it's a risk in itself. If it has risk management in place, but it doesn't comply with it, then it's also risk management. A court will always consider the principles pertaining to what's called this, like a corporate veil, that there's limited personal liability when we deal with an entity. It's only in certain instances that the court will pierce that veil to say, oh, now you can be held personally liable.
Okay.
And I've actually got a video that deals with the issues of personal liability. So I would encourage your audience to have a look at that, because it is an important issue. It comes up quite frequently, and that's actually why I made that video.
And I thought it was quite a useful video for me. I think the last question now is that there are people who may be listening to us who are saying, man, I'd like to donate to NPOs. What are the benefits for donors in terms of the Section 18A certificate? And then how should the organizations set themselves up to be able to provide that tax benefit to their donors?
So, Patrick, that benefit is available to some organizations. if the organization has got 18A status, then if a donor asks for a receipt when a donation is given, the organization can issue a receipt, but it must ensure that it's compliant with the requirements of Section 18A. And look, I cannot overestimate the importance of compliance in terms of 18A. Because I know even when an organization applies for 18A status, there is scrutiny in terms of the application to ensure that it is compliant. And also, in terms of ongoing compliance, that's important. There's a legal definition, for example, of what's meant by donation. So, and I've seen it in some instances where I've been asked by organizations to review, let's say, a donor agreement, and sometimes the content of that agreement is not consistent with Section 18A, because the donor would get some marketing benefit or other benefit out of the process, which is then patently part of the agreement. But again, it's not that people want to not comply with the legislation, but they just don't know the the requirements in terms of the legislation, and the obligation to ensure that there is compliance is on the organization receiving the funds. But let's assume it is compliant, a receipt is issued, and the donor will then use that receipt when submitting his or her its tax return, and then get a deduction on the taxable income. And so the idea is behind the whole 18A is that it's government's way of supporting or facilitating support for certain activities or public benefit activities identified in terms of the Income Tax Act.
Wow, man, I don't know how to thank you, Ricardo, because this was not a billable hour. You could have built this. You could have gotten much more out of this hour than we have. But I think we have benefited so much from this information, and I think those people that would be watching and looking at this program in the future will be really, really in a far better position to know where to start, how they can comply, how they can turn their organization into becoming effective. And I really want to thank you so much for your selflessness with your time, with your skills and resourcefulness, not just on this platform, but I mean, all the platform that I know. I mean, even if I can say it myself, your fees were very reasonable, unless you change them since you came to Johannesburg. But this is a city of gold, man. So yeah, but I really want to thank you and really express my appreciation to you, as well as to our viewers who are watching this program now. And apologies for the bit of some hiccups at the beginning. We had some problems with that technology, but for those of you who want to carry on getting these conversations, we have them on most Sundays at 2 o'clock. And I'd like to ask all of you to please go now and subscribe to my channel, which is Moments of Insight and Growth. Just subscribe there so that you can get notification. Make sure that other people can get this information by sharing and you like it. We really want to say thank you. I don't know if you got last word, Ricardo, before we call it a day.
No, thank you. Thank you so much, Patrick. Again, I appreciate the opportunity. Also, and I want to commend those involved with non-profit organizations. Look, I'm a practitioner, but to have people participating in this session on a Sunday afternoon to listen to issues of compliance and governance, that's commendable. But that's the kind of caliber of people that are involved with the sector, and it's I want to commend servants of the non-profit sector, and thanks for having done this, Patrick.
Thank you so much, man. I will be in touch with you. We need to hook up since you moved up here and I moved up to Gauteng, and so that we can have some coffee and or Milo or rooibos tea, whatever the case may be. But thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you. Same to you, Patrick.
I'll be in touch, man.
You
Thank
too.
you. Take good care.
Thanks. You too.
Cheers,
Bye-bye.
guys. Enjoy your afternoon, all of you. And I know that some of you are watching soccer or whatever the case may be. All the best with your teams. Thank you so much. Cheers. Bye-bye. I can't even see your names just now. Neither can I see your questions, but apologies if you have sent some questions in. As I said, it's been a difficult thing to navigate. Thank you so much. I'm now going to say goodbye.